For example, you can put B12 plus 60, or B12 and plus age, and you'll get these statistics that I'm giving you here. The 30% of the people over 60 are deficient, that 37% of the people over 80 are deficient. Now, when you combine that with the fact that there are 40 million people, 40 million Americans over 60, you have 10 to 15 million older Americans who are impacted by B12 deficiency. Now, this is, fortunately, one of the things that mainstream medicine knows something about. A lot of mainstream doctors will give you, you can get a B12 shot from a lot of mainstream doctors, but a lot of them still don't know about it. And I can give you a quick story. Went up to visit my almost mother-in-law in Boise, and she was having this tremendous fatigue problem, and wondering, you know, it's a very serious fatigue problem. I mean, she would get tired combing her hair. And she's a woman about maybe 80, I think. And she happened to mention that she was seeing her doctor. Her doctor had told her she's anemic. I said, that could be a B12 deficiency, because what little I knew that if you had a fatigue problem and anemia, it could be a B12 deficiency. And of course, B12 is one of the safest of all substances. I don't think there's a known toxic dose. And in any case, so we went over to the mall, bought some B12, gave it to her. By the time I left, she was feeling better, and today she goes to the mall herself to do her walks because it's cold in Boise. So, I mean, now why do I mention that story? Because her doctor, who she liked very well and who was a very nice person from all accounts, didn't think of B12. So my point is, mainstream doctors, even though they're a little better on B12 than they are on a lot of things, still aren't very good. And there are millions of people who are suffering, like my almost mother-in-law. I hope my significant other doesn't mind me saying it putting it that way, but who are impacted. Their quality of life is impacted because their doctor doesn't do this simple thing of having them take a little 5 milligram sublingual tablet of B12 and put it under their tongue and let it dissolve. Methylcobalamin is the best, but you know, yeah. But basically, they'll all turn into the same things. I think Steve believes that, and so, but we can discuss that later. This is a very interesting thing. So if you have someone in your family who is older and feeling fatigue, now there's lots and lots of reasons for fatigue, but one of the most common is this B12 thing, and at least get some improvement in many, many people. Have them take sublingual B12. And why? Because as you get older, for all these reasons, wait a minute, did I go too fast here? Let's see here. Okay, these are the consequences of B12 deficiency. Fatigue, dizziness and imbalance, creepy crawly skin, interesting one, I don't have time to go into it, and non-Alzheimer's dementia. Non-Alzheimer's dementia because it turns out that B12 is required for the body's production of phosphatidylserine, a phospholipid that is necessary for the proper functioning of neurological functioning. And so when you have a B12 deficiency, I think you also have a phosphatidylserine deficiency. I think that's the mechanism. But in any case, you do get this senile dementia. And now the one I was looking for, here's the causes of B12 deficiency. Now, the interesting one that accounts for, the two that account for the loss of B12 in older people are loss of intrinsic factor and poor digestion, or rather lack of stomach acid, which of course leads to poor digestion. When I hypothesized that my significant other's mother had a B12 deficiency, of course the family wanted to know if this was really a good idea. And so I went on the computer of Judy's brother, and I learned about intrinsic factor. Up popped intrinsic factor. Never heard of it before. Intrinsic factor turns out to be something that the body produces in the, I think, lower intestine, and without it you can't absorb B12. So when you eat meat, which is the main source of B12, without intrinsic factor, you don't get B12. You don't get it absorbed. You eat the meat, the B12 is in the meat, and it goes right through your system. As you get older, you lose intrinsic factor, and hence, older people have a deficiency of B12. It's one of the main reasons. Another thing that happens as you get older is that you produce, is like everything, you seem to produce everything less hormones, less everything, but you also produce less stomach acid. And of course, what happens to older people? They start having problems with heartburn, they start taking antacids, and so on top of a already decreased stomach acid situation, and they're taking antacids, and of course that aggravates the problem. And again, they don't get absorption of B12, and so you have a B12 deficiency. Now, as I say, there's the treatment for it. So you can take a look at that on the sheets that I passed out. All these slides are on those sheets. If anybody didn't pick them up, you can get some afterwards. Now, the antacids story. This is another story, but I'm not going to go into too much detail, but this is one of the great hoaxes. I think the country spends $4 billion a year buying antacids. Heartburn's a very common occurrence. I think 30% of the American public any given day has heartburn. And of course, the television is full of ads for the purple pill and this and that. And so you're supposed to take pills which reduce your stomach acid so you don't have heartburn, which is just a big mistake. Of course, heartburn is caused by stomach acid getting into the lower end of the esophagus. Sometimes it comes up higher, sometimes even into your mouth. But the heartburn, when you feel it burn right there, excuse me, we got a mic on. When you feel it burn right there, that's because there's a little sphincter there that isn't quite tight, isn't quite strong enough to keep the stomach acid out. And so you get a little acid right there, and you get a little burn right there. It's an acid burn. Now, so it is due to acid, but it's not because you have too much acid in your stomach. It's because the acid's in the wrong place. Even if you have too little acid, you're going to have heartburn. But what happens when you take an antacid? When you take an antacid, you shut down digestion. And when you shut down digestion, you become malnourished. And then, then you don't get B12, you don't get amino acids. When you don't get amino acids, you don't get the neurotransmitters that are based in amino acids like serotonin and dopamine and what's the other one? Norepinephrine, right. Those are the big three out of the four big, neurotransmitters are based in these amino acids. So if you don't digest amino acids, you're going to have depression, anxiety. And as a matter of fact, Jonathan Wright has written an excellent book called What's Good About Stomach Acid, I think is the name of it. It's in the handout there. And it's really informative. Now, what's the point? The point is, if you have heartburn, then do something about it. But don't just treat the cause and say, okay, I'll cut back on stomach acid, because you cut back on stomach acid, you're going to have all kinds of problems in addition to your original problem. That's a case of treating the symptom rather than the cause. So you have to find out what the right treatment is, and to do that, take a look at Jonathan Wright's book. Vitamin D deficiency. This one, of course, is fascinating. We've spent some time on it because we have our local expert, Bill Grant, who's taught us so much about this. One of the first things that I heard about vitamin D that blew my mind was that vitamin D prevents prostate cancer. Or put it this way, a deficiency of vitamin D makes you more likely to have prostate cancer, as well as a variety of other cancers. That was the first thing I heard. And then I heard that, and the proof of this was that the further north you went in this country, the greater the incidence of prostate cancer in the population. I said, what? They actually have research on that? So I went to their computer, and I put in there prostate cancer. And by the way, for those of you who aren't real experienced in this, if you use a phrase, if you use more than one word, you have to put it in quotes, or otherwise you get all kinds of stuff. You have to put in quotes. See, prostate cancer plus, you don't need the plus, but I always like the plus because it's more intuitive to me. It says prostate cancer in quotes plus latitude, and up pops the research. And there it is. The more sun you get, the less likely you are to get prostate cancer. Well, that was the beginning. Then, of course, since then we've learned about all kinds of stuff, including the handout that, I don't know if I put it out this time, but I passed it out last time, that Bill Grant was involved in a great big review study of 20 articles, putting it all together, showing that adequate vitamin D would reduce the risk of colon cancer by 50%. I'm now talking, notice I switched from prostate cancer to colon cancer. Well, it turns out there's a half a dozen cancers, maybe 8 cancers. How many are there?
About
20. 20 different cancers that are prevented by vitamin D. So if we take a look at the various things that lead to vitamin D deficiency. Skin color. Black men have a mortality rate from prostate cancer twice that of white men. Air pollution, because if the air, or the season of the year, the wintertime, you obviously have a hard time getting sun, not only because the rays are oblique, but also because it's cold and it's hard to get outside with and expose your skin. Air pollution, which can be a problem, and latitude, as I've already said, and the use of sunscreens. The consequences are these. As we all know, vitamin D is essential to strong bones. In fact, the thing that probably we learned as children is that if you don't get enough vitamin D and you don't get enough sunshine, you'll have rickets and you'll walk bow-legged and that kind of thing. Then, of course, we've talked about cancer. MS is a very striking example of the importance of vitamin D in the body. I'm not sure the statistics on this. I think in Campbell's, there's an appendix in Campbell's book, China Study, and vitamin D, something like from the equator to far north, the incidence of MS in the farther northern latitudes is 100 times the incidence of MS at the equator, which I guess is virtually none. Is that right, Bill? Something 100 times. And again, check it out. Put MS plus latitude, and you'll get it. You'll see it for yourself. Don't believe it because I told you. Because these are facts which, you know, everything depends on these things being correct. Because, you know, this is not a sales presentation. This is science here. So if you want to know what the science is, you go on the web and find out what it is. Okay. I want to move along because you know, we've got a little bit of a late start, and the good stuff that we need to discuss is at the end. Why white people are white, I think I mentioned this last time, so I'll just be real quick with this. You know, we started out, our great-great-grandfathers were black, and great-great-grandmothers too. And the reason they were black is because if you live near the equator in the tropics, the sun will burn the folate out of your skin, and you'll have some serious folic acid deficiencies, which of course is, you know, bad news. You won't be healthy. So you have to be adapted to the tropics. You have to have dark skin, especially if you're running around without a lot of clothes. Then, 65,000 to 100,000 years ago, our ancestors left Africa, started to migrate along the coast to India, up into Middle East, up into Europe. And of course, what happened? As they went north, their dark skin was no longer adaptive. In fact, it was counter-adaptive, because now, with dark skin, they couldn't get enough vitamin D. And so, over a course of maybe 50,000 generations, I figured it out, and I think that's the right number. I figured 20 years, a generation, 20 years in those days. Maybe it's even generous. Maybe it's more like 15 years, average time between before human being would become productive. Let's say 15 or 20 years, so that's 5 in 100 years, and that's 50 in 1,000 years, and that's, well, you can figure it out, 510,000 and 5,000 generations in 100,000. So in 5,000 generations, there was an adaptation, and we became white. That's why we're white. And the whitest people are the Icelanders. The Norsemen, who have very white skin, can hardly stand to be out in the sun, and red hair. And then, of course, they came down, and after they got to Iceland and lived there for a while, then they came down, very robust people, and conquered Ireland, parts of Ireland and Wales, and also the coast of France. And in fact, Jacklin, my name Jacklin, comes from that ancestry to some extent. Is a French name, as you probably recognize, been anglicized. But anyway, so hopefully I got some of that stock in me.
That's when they got screwed up, right?
Now, why do I use this example? I use this example because, once again, mainstream doctors are off the mark. Once again, they're trying to tell us to avoid the sun. If we do go out in the sun, to use sunscreen. This is disastrous information. Of course, and I'll leave aside the fact that the dermatologists doing the most research are getting their funding from the sunscreen companies. You know, how do you get ahead in science? You get ahead in science by doing research. Where do you get your funding for research? Who do you think is paying for most of the research in this country? The government's not paying for it. It's the corporations that have a stake in the research. But in any case, I leave that aside. I don't want to be conspiratorial yet. But the fact of the matter is that the dermatologists had a fit when this came out. And so they're saying, oh, for heaven's sake, this is terrible advice because people can get skin cancer. Well, you know, Michael Holick, H-O-L-I-C-K, this Boston dermatologist who's written a wonderful book, The UV Advantage, points out that there's really the three predominant kinds of skin cancer. Two are rarely fatal, and it's melanoma that's the dangerous one. And melanoma, you're protected against melanoma by vitamin D. So again, we're getting bad advice from the doctors. Now, I want to talk about heart surgery. Before I do, I just want to throw this out. There's so much confusion about what heart disease is, and this will just get you to thinking, I think. We could spend a lot of time talking about these four kinds, but I just want to distinguish them quickly so that we can kind of agree about what we're talking about later a little bit. One of the problems which is identified as heart disease is angina, when you get chest pains, chronic chest pains, and they're debilitating, and you have to do something about it. And that's usually caused by significant blockage in a coronary artery. It's not always, however. It's an interesting thing. I don't know. There's a significant percentage of cases where there's not this blockage and you still get angina. And I don't know what the explanation of that is. I just found that out recently. And then there's a second problem, which we're very familiar with. This is the one we think of as artery disease par excellence. That's artery. And this is where the word heart disease is used as synonymous with artery disease. Now, in the case of artery, of course, the first one's a kind of artery disease too, but the second, in fact, both of the first two are artery disease. But there's a difference between hard plaque artery disease and soft plaque artery disease. And it's a soft plaque where you don't have the 90% occlusion, but you have a softer plaque which is more likely to rupture, which usually leads to the thrombotic clot-based heart attack, where a clot blocks the coronary artery and part of your heart muscle starts to get starved and you have pain and you have a significant period of time actually to save your life, to get to a hospital and do something about it. Then there's a third kind of heart disease, which is the sudden death kind of heart attack. This is caused by fibrillation, arrhythmia, where your heart experiences an electrical problem and that the electrical impulse is not rhythmic, and as a result it fibrillates, your heart just quivers like this and stops pumping, and you don't last long. And that's a very significant problem. It's an interesting thing that kills as many people as the thrombotic heart attack, the clot-based heart attack, and yet we almost hear nothing about it. And maybe because there's so, there's not a whole lot you can do to prevent it. At least we don't, at this point, the doctors don't know what to do. I think the alternative doctors have something to say about that. And then lastly, there's the congestive heart failure, where the problem is the heart muscle itself. Intuitively you'd think heart disease would pertain to the heart itself. Well, congestive heart failure is the one that's, in a sense, most intuitively heart disease. The other one's the arteries and the electrical system, and that one is the heart failure. Now, we're going to talk about heart surgery, which is really addresses the first two, either the angina kind of situation or the thrombotic, the risk of a thrombotic heart attack. And the striking thing, which of course I've mentioned here a couple of times over the last couple of years, the striking thing is that the medical science, as published in the best medical journals, New England Journal of Medicine and so forth, is no doubt about the fact that 90% of the heart surgeries that are done in this country do not prolong life or prevent heart attacks. They're unnecessary. They don't do any good, and there's better ways to solve the problems that prompted surgery in the first place. Now, there's lots of surgeries that are unnecessary. There's a long list of them. You can find them in Consumer Reports. I've got a list of them in my outline of my book, which I can email you if you send me an email, I'll send you a copy. But the thing about, which is really astonishing, about the bypass, and the two kinds of heart surgery I'm talking about, by the way, are bypass and angioplasty. Bypass, where you take a vein from your leg and you reconstruct and form a new artery on the heart, replacing the one that's clogged. Just kind of add a new highway around the one that's not working. And the angioplasty, when you insert a little balloon, blow up the balloon, and pack so if the artery is getting clogged and there's not a clear passage, you put a little balloon in there, blow up the balloon, and it packs up against the membrane, the wall of the artery, and makes it clear again. Now, the striking thing about these two surgeries, especially bypass, is that you can't imagine a more brutal and traumatic experience. I don't know if you've ever heard about how it actually goes down. They cut you from your your thigh all the way up to here. Oops, sorry again. Not used to that. Then they break. They just like break your bones right there, and then they have a spreader. And they put this big machine in there, and they just spread the chest like this so they can get at the heart. Well, the only reason I mention this is because recovery is difficult, and in the process of doing this operation, they have to actually stop your heart. And they have you a little pump outside here on the table somewhere, pumping your blood. Your heart is stopped. Well, while they're doing this, they don't always quite capture the timing just right. And guess what happens? Sometimes, very often, you don't maintain adequate circulation to the brain. 67% of the people who have a bypass have some cognitive impairment as a result of it. This isn't counting the 3% who die, either on the table or in the following year. And this isn't counting the fact that it's a very expensive operation. In fact, the prices I have, did I give the prices? I don't know. Well, I better leave this up again because I want to come back to this. The prices are astronomical. And here we have a situation where if you look at these studies, there is no doubt, and this is only a small sample, if you look at, for the whole review of the research on the efficacy of heart surgery, the outcomes, the outcome numbers. Then take a look at one of Julian Whitaker's excellent books. The first one was, Is Heart Surgery Necessary? And the second one, more recent, is Reversing Heart Disease. It's all right there, spread out, very clear, very simple, in maybe 10, 20 pages. But the main studies are these, and I want to put them up here because, again, don't believe me. Don't believe it because I said it. Believe it because you can go on the web and you can pull up this research, and you can go on Medline and read the abstracts of the research or that reports this. The main one was this CAST study. And one of our members called me just yesterday. Beverly, are you here? I can't remember her last name now, but she's one of our good members. She said, I can't find the study, and I gave her a little more detail. It wasn't hard to find. She was looking at under CASS, but didn't come up. But if you put in there coronary artery surgery studies, you'll get the study. Now, why hasn't someone told the doctors? That's the question. Okay, here are some good ways. So here are some better ways to deal with artery disease. And Dave is making faces, so I think maybe he thinks there's even better ways. But maybe you're just looking at the first one, right, Dave?
Just the first one.
Just the first one. Okay, the plant-based whole food diet is one. Ornish, Dean Ornish has got research to show he can reverse heart disease using that kind of a diet. And I'm not stating any preferences here. But and exercise is tremendously important. Chelation we've heard about. We've talked about proteolytic enzymes. EECP, this is one that I heard about first from Julian Whitaker. And I put it in the list, and my significant other said, what is that? What are you talking about? Of course, I wasn't even sure what the initial stood for. I guess it stands for Enhanced External Counter Pulsation. So I said, so off to Google we went. Put in Google, EECP, up pops the fact that it was developed at Harvard 40 years ago, and that they're doing it right this minute at UCSF. And they have a whole description at UCSF, how it works, why it works, and what the outcomes are. It doesn't hurt. It's relatively cheap. It does take 35 sessions. And then in 7 or 8 years, you might need to do it again. But it's painless and relatively cheap. And you don't end up cognitively impaired, and you don't die on the operating table.
What's it cost?
I don't know, but I don't think it's that expensive. And so if you go to this website, you can find out.
Slight calculation there for the price.
It's okay. So it's maybe $200
No, $112 a session.
$100 a session, 35 sessions, so it's going to maybe cost you, all told, maybe $5,000. Now, I think it's covered by insurance, too, which is great.
Yes.
Okay.
You can't leave off vitamin C and lysine on this list. It should be first thing on the list.
Okay. And also arginine, because, John Cook, that Bob Cathcart, Dr. Cathcart referred to, John Cook, the distinguished cardiologist at Stanford, just wrote a book, The Cardiovascular Cure, in which he explains that his research and the research of other people has established now that if you take arginine in large doses, which I think is like 2 or 3 grams a day, I have to check on that. I put 2 or 3 grams here, it might be more. But if you do that, you will rebuild the endothelium, which is this magical transparent membrane. The artery is lined with what is called the endothelium. The endothelium is like 1 cell thick. It's so thin that if you were able to peel it off, it would be translucent. Light would come through it. And the health of this endothelium determines the health of your arteries. And arginine rebuilds them. So you can reverse heart disease with arginine. There's the costs. I did make a mistake here. Lives lost should be 27,000, since only 90% are unnecessary, and it kills 30,000 a year. The operation kills 30,000 a year. 90% of those operations are unnecessary, so only 27,000 die unnecessarily. But still, 27,000 a year, and this operation came in about 1977, so you can figure out how many people have died unnecessarily. Now, this is a hard thing to get your mind around. I don't know about you, but here I am glibly saying, okay, 27,000 people die a year from this unnecessary operation. And of course, you say, oh, wow, can that be true? That's pretty extreme. Can we really get our minds around that? That's happening in this country? And I'm not sure we can. But I'm hoping that by the end of my talk, you'll be able to get your minds around it. Because this is not some kind of anomaly in American medicine. Okay, now we go to the killer drugs. There's lots of killer drugs. I'm just going to talk about 2 of them very briefly. This one I'm talking about because the whole book was written about it. The book is by, was it John Moore? John Moore, Deadly Medicine. I've got the book. Very well done. It's a journalist, and he makes it really interesting. All the personalities and the FDA and everybody. And, the little guy who's saying, wait a minute, and they're saying, shut up. Shut up, we don't want to hear from you. We've got this figured out here. And then the little guy turns out to be right. I don't know if it ever did him any good. But there's always somebody who say, wait a minute, you got it all wrong. Well, okay, what did the little guy say? Well, first of all, let me tell you what the drug company said. There's a phenomenon that many of you know about, I know about it, called premature ventricular contractions. The heart has 4 chambers. I guess the top 2 are the atria and the bottom 2 are the ventricula, right? Okay, and the ventricula, you can get just a little bit of a little hop in it once in a while. You can feel it. And that's called a premature ventricular contraction. A lot of people say, holy smokes, what's going on? I can feel this. So they rush off to their doctor. It turns out it's pretty harmless. And everybody always thought it was pretty harmless, but of course you don't know that when you first experience it, so it's a good idea to go to your doctor. But they found out by using this drug, Tambicor, that they could suppress these premature ventricular contractions. And then they came up with the theory that, sudden cardiac arrest, sudden death heart attack, when your heart starts to just fibrillate like that. Remember I was telling you quivering, it doesn't pump, it just quivers, fibrillates. If we could prevent premature ventricular contractions, maybe we could prevent ventricular fibrillation. And then we could save lives. It's a great idea. So they put everybody on Tambicor, and meanwhile, people are saying, wait a minute, we haven't tested this theory. I said, well, it makes so much sense. You know, and they finally tested it, and they were confident. I think the drug company paid for it because we're going to show people now that this really works. And guess what? It caused cardiac arrest. 5 to 6% of the people who took the drug dropped dead. And they could figure out how many would have dropped dead otherwise. There's a control group, how many dropped dead in the control group, how many dropped dead with the group taking the Tambicor. 5 to 6% of the people died, for a total of 50,000 people over 5 years, 10,000 people a year. Now, do the doctors who were prescribing Tambicor know that? No, of course not.
Did they care?
Yeah, sure they cared. Absolutely they cared. They cared. I mean, that's the point. See, is it the doctor's fault? No, it's not your doctor's fault. I'll come back to that. But obviously it's not your doctor's fault. Your doctor is just like you. You don't want to see somebody die unnecessarily. It's not the doctor's fault. The doctor did not have the information. Why not? Who had the information? Well, nobody had it really, but the drug companies had the theory, and then they had some information. And finally they pried the information out of the drug companies, and they put a black box warning on it. It's still sold, by the way. And I even know someone who's taking it. But what are you going to do? Then there's Vioxx, which is last scandal, not last year, year before, wasn't it? 2004. This is all I'm going to say about that one. You all know the story of David Graham?
Can I add one little
Yeah.
comment? All this is a good argument for prevention of the problem in the first place, so that it may be really undesirable for most people to get out and do their 16 miles of running.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at what happens if you get the problem, then maybe it's worth it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you know, the thing is, Ira, we just don't have the constitution you do. I mean, we don't have the character you do. I don't have the... I was a runner for years. I've already stopped. I mean, not even, as old as you. But I mean, but you know, I just, as a matter of fact, it's
a good argument for why you should get back.
It's like Boris says, very few of us are going to be able to do that.
Okay.
You know, and that's why, we salute you. Okay. Anyway, Graham went before the Congress. He was the whistleblower, and the FDA told him to shut up, keep that quiet. That's in-house stuff. We don't want you going to some conference and spreading that around. And he did it anyway. And then the Congress got heard about it, and they called him up, and they said, okay, we want to know about this. This is something the American public need to know. And he came before the American Congress and testified, and this is what he said. Between 88,000 and 139,000 people in the U.S. suffered heart attacks or strokes as a result of taking Vioxx, and as many as 40% of these, or about 55,000 people, died as a result. Now, what was Vioxx for? Vioxx was the great breakthrough because it was safer than aspirin. See, aspirin did the job of dealing with arthritis pain. For most people, it did a pretty good job. But it caused stomach ulcers. Well, so we don't want stomach ulcers, so we have Vioxx. Well, unfortunately, although Vioxx may have solved the stomach ulcer problem, it killed you. Okay, now this is an extremely fascinating study. I bring it in for a slightly different reason. Remember, I've been asking you, did the doctors who prescribed Vioxx know that Vioxx was going to kill their patients? The answer is no. Did the doctors that prescribed Tambicor know that that was going to hurt their patients? No. Now, what about Norvasc? Norvasc is, what does it say, the 5th most prescribed drug in the world, sales in the billions, and well, 1 in 8 Americans is being treated for high blood pressure. Maybe 1 in 20 or something. 1 in 30 is using Norvasc. Probably some people in this room are using Norvasc even. Well, the government, the NIH, decided to do a study of this. And so they undertook an 8-year study. Lots of people, 55 years and older. And they were going to compare the 4 kinds of treatment, the 4 kinds of drug treatment. There are more than 4 kinds of treatment, it turns out, but there's 4 kinds of drugs that are used to treat high blood pressure. And there they are. And it turns out that the old water pill worked the best. Better than Norvasc, better than the ACE inhibitors, better than all those other, what are the other ones? Let me see here. Better than the alpha androgenergic blocker, better than the calcium channel blocker. The water pill that just caused you to pee off a little extra water and reduce the pressure on your circulation worked the best. Now, what's the point of this? Well, the point is the doctors were prescribing Norvasc, right, at $737 a year. And the diuretic costs $37 a year, so there's a big difference. But that's not really the point. The point is this. The doctors didn't know what was the best treatment. Until they did this study, they didn't know what the best treatment was. Now, here's the thing that really is very striking. I want you to reflect on this. When your doctor prescribes a drug, he doesn't know which drug. If he's just thinking drugs, like they just talk drugs and surgery in mainstream medicine, right? Drugs and surgery. Okay, now we're going to do drugs. Okay, now he doesn't know which drug is best. Why? Because there are no comparative studies done. Very rarely is there a comparative study done. This study by the government is very rare. So your doctor doesn't know what is best. And so what is he yielding to? He's yielding to the excitement of the moment, the last sales rep in his office who's got some kind of angle with this new drug that he's promoting. It's better than anything yet. It's the newest. It's got to be the best. It's the most expensive. Oh my God, high tech. And that's it. And this again is something very difficult to understand. That because we go to our doctors thinking, well, these guys are experts. They've spent their years studying it, their lives studying this stuff. But in fact, what we come to find out is that they're not only it isn't just that the doctors are misinformed, they're not informed because there's no data. The FDA asked the drug company to show that their drug works better than a placebo. That means it works better than nothing, right? No. So now you've got a lot of drugs that work better than nothing. At least that's what they say. And of course that's not always the case, but let's suppose it was true. It doesn't answer the question which is best. And so here's Medicare shelling out $1 billion, let's say, for Americans to take Norvasc. And in fact, they could have saved probably $1 billion by having them take diuretics. But the important point is this. They're not doing best choice medicine because they don't know what the best choice is. That's the important point. Yes?
I'd like to point out, though, that most doctors think they know what the best choice is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if a patient comes to their doctor and says, what evidence is there about Vioxx, they get abuse rather than an actual inquiry by the doctor.
That's
in
right.
most cases.
That's
and
right.
That if there was lots of professional advice given to doctors about the water pill being not as good as these other avenues, and so if a patient were to actually put forth this thesis, they would have been ridiculed, dismissed, abused, or referred to a psychiatrist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, I think actually that if you challenge many doctors, and I'm not, of course, doctors are as varied as all of us. I mean, there's a tremendous range of personalities from idealists to mercenaries. But a lot of the doctors will say, hey, I'm the doctor. If you don't like what I'm telling you, find yourself another doctor. And that's the end of that.
By the way, Bill,
yeah.
A placebo is not by any way, shape, or form just a zero effect. Because a placebo reacts on your mind changes your metabolic rate, changes your chemistry, so it can have a very positive effect on you.
That's true. That's true. But nevertheless, it's still the case, though, basically that all you have to do to get FDA, to show effectiveness and get FDA approval, FDA wants to know if it's effective and safe. To show it's effective, all you have to do is do better than placebo. They don't have to show they're better than anything on the market. See, that's the thing.
You know, you're being a little generous with some doctors. I can tell you that I chelate more doctors than they refer me patients.
Did you ever hear that? Dr. Cathcart says that I'm being too generous with the doctors because, and I don't think I am, but I'll come back to my defense of the doctors later in just a minute. He says because, and here's the proof, he says he chelates more doctors and those doctors refer him patients. In other words, the doctors believe in chelation, but they don't tell their patients about it. And they don't send him, and they don't, of course, certainly don't do chelation because they're worried about losing their license. So they don't send them to Bob Cathcart because even referring to a patient for chelation might get him in trouble. But nevertheless, they come. Barry?
Yeah, I had this experience in high school. Our sports doctor always bad-mouthed chiropractors. And I was about 17, found out where he was going out of town to see a chiropractor. And, you know, I just had a doctor I called up to find out what he was made of. And he went ballistic over the telephone, screaming about chelation therapy is a complete hoax on the people, and he saved millions of lives, or hundreds of lives, so he should know. Now, I mean, so there's a little bit of, you're just wrong on some of this, Bill. I'm sorry. Plus the fact, some of these doctors are just damn ignorant. They're going on an emotional, they don't know anything.
So you think we should blame the doctors?
What?
You think we should blame the doctors? Okay, well, I'll come to my defense of the doctors in a minute. And I'd have to tell you, I see a weakness in my defense in a certain respect, so we'll come to that later, okay? But I think there's a lot to be said in defense of the doctors. Okay, let me see here. Okay, that's the results on the study, the Norvasc. Okay, now just for again, we'll skip through this quickly, but it's on your handout. These are some of the things you can do that are not drug treatments for hypertension. Interesting thing, when they did this study, NIH spends millions and millions of dollars. They only looked at drugs. They didn't look at, these non-drug treatments. And so they really don't know yet what's best because they have never compared the drug treatments to the non-drug treatments. Nobody's done that research. Who can afford it? 8 years, 50,000, 40,000 people, or whatever it was. Who can afford that kind of thing, right?
Taxpayer.
The taxpayers should pay, because if taxpayers don't pay for it, they're going to pay with their lives. But it's not happening. Okay, now I want to, I hope you understand, I didn't come here to rant and rave, even though it's a pretty enormous problem we're facing. I didn't come here to rant and rave. I'm trying to give you good science and show you that the mainstream doctors don't have good science behind their practice. That again and again they're using treatments which they know very little about or have all wrong. And one of the things, now, again, and so that I'm not just yelling at you, I want to use the word disaster in a very precise way so you don't just think I'm being rhetorical. Say, well, this is a goddamn disaster. No, I'm not using the word disaster like that. I want to use it in a very precise way, right like this. A medical practice, a treatment plan, or the absence of a treatment plan, which is the cause of death for over 50,000 people, or suffering or loss for over 1 million people. And I think we can do the numbers and show 100 examples of medical disasters that fit that definition. And I'm writing a book. I don't know if I'll ever finish it. If somebody else would come and be president of Smart Life Forum, I'd gladly give up this job, which is a very nice job and I enjoy it, but I'd gladly give it up if I finish that book if somebody wants the job. But anyway, hopefully I'm going to finish that book in the next couple of years. And I can send you the outline and give you the whole list of 100. But this is the breakdown. Sorry, before I give you the list of 100, I wanted to just stick with the concept of medical disaster. Go back over our 7 examples. The first one, B12 deficiency, 10 million seniors suffer, so that's a medical disaster. Second one, antacids, 10 million people are malnourished, have depression and anxiety, they don't know where it came from, have fatigue, experience non-Alzheimer's dementia, any number of different problems. That's a disaster. The third one, vitamin D deficiency. People are running around with their heads all covered up, wearing sunscreen, and they have, as a result, there's, I think somewhere I saw an estimate, I don't know how many lives a year could be lost if people would get enough vitamin D. How much is it, Phil?
That's just for cancer. Then you have hip fractures.
Right, hip fractures and, of course, you have hip fractures, and as you probably know, older people who have hip fracture, they only live usually on average about 1 or 2 years beyond their hip fracture. Anyway, that's a disaster. So that's the first 3 examples are all related to disasters. The fourth one, heart surgeries, that's obviously a disaster. It should be 27,000 instead of 30,000. Tambacor was a disaster. Vioxx is a disaster. And there's at least 15 or 20 other killer drugs which I could come up with a list like that. And you can find it on worstpills.org. If you, it's kind of hard to find because they go drug by drug. They don't just say here's the killer drugs. You have to kind of look at along one at a time, but you can compile a list. It's www.worstpills.org. It's
worse drugs or worse pills?
Worst pills. Okay, now this I'm going to skip by this. This is a very nice point. Being a philosopher, I love to draw distinctions. I mean, the philosophers used to say the truth lies in fine distinctions. If you can draw a good distinction, you're getting some clarity. Well, I think this distinction between 2 kinds of malpractice is a distinction like that. The kind of malpractice we usually think of is the kind of malpractice which is what I call type 1 malpractice, where you have a poor execution of a treatment plan. The doctor does the heart surgery, and he leaves the scalpel inside. And the person bleeds to death. And everybody said, oh my gosh, what a terrible mistake. Or he cuts off the wrong leg or something like that. Or you get into the hospital for, to have your appendix out, and you catch a staph infection. And you're there for 6 months trying to get rid of it. Those are cases of where somehow the plan, it didn't go according to plan. The plan wasn't followed well enough, either through negligence or maybe just bad luck, and something bad happened. But the kind of the malpractice that I'm interested in here tonight is type 2, where you have the wrong choice of treatment plan, where you're not doing the thing that's best in the first place. For example, if you have a heart surgery which is unnecessary, if someone could be treated for angina without having a heart bypass, and he could get past the doctor who says, there's a time bomb in your chest. Don't get off the couch. I think we should keep you in the hospital and do the operation today. This is a standard script, if you haven't heard it. If somebody can get past that, he can do any number of things to get rid of his angina without the surgery, and then he gets the surgery. That's malpractice of type 2, even if he survives. And even if he doesn't have any cognitive impairment. Because you still spent $50,000 in a year of suffering, which was unnecessary. And it wasn't the best way to solve the problem. Because the best way to solve the problem, you have to look at the benefits and the costs. And so you can look at that later on. We can skip by that. Okay, now, in the book that I'm writing, I classify the disasters as follows. There's powerful biomolecules which are not part of mainstream medical practice. What is a biomolecule? I'm talking about things that you're very familiar with. I'm talking a vitamin is a biomolecule. A mineral, a trace mineral is a biomolecule, excuse me. A hormone, a amino acid. Omega-3 is a biomolecule. Enzymes, pepsin is a biomolecule. These are things which we study because we have a biochemical orientation in this group. And that takes us to the biochemistry of health. But the doctors don't have that orientation. They have the black box orientation. You put in the drug and you see what the outcome is. You do this study, you put in this drug, you're not quite sure. They have some theories, maybe the drug company has some theories as to what it works. And it does these things. If they knew what was going on inside, my God, they would also then know what the side effects were. And heaven help them, because if they had to disclose that, they could never sell any of the stuff, or very little of it. And then the second kind is underutilized drugs and herbs. The third kind is unnecessary use of drugs. And the fourth kind is unnecessary surgeries. Now we come to another point where I feel like a little of my old philosophical training kicking in, except it's so elementary that I can't take too much credit. In philosophy, we spend a lot of time analyzing concepts. And especially interesting are evaluative concepts, because people argue a lot about evaluative concepts. And the evaluative concepts are good, better, and best. And best is an evaluative concept because it's unlike good, which is good isn't over here in one kind of category, just has one kind of analysis. Better and best are over here with a different kind of analysis, because best is derivative from better. If you understand the concept of better, then you can easily understand the concept of best, because best just means better than all the rest. See, simple point. This kind of point that philosophers like to make. Okay, now if we can talk about some other time why I find that interesting. But anyway, so best is better than all the rest. Now, how are you going to find out what's best? Well, first of all, I'd say there's three things that are important here. If best means better than all the rest, then you have to have comparative information. You must have comparative information. And as I've already shown, we just don't have that in medical science. Nobody's paying for it. It doesn't exist. When it does occur, it's a rarity, and people are very surprised. And I'm talking now again about the ALHAT study, which is that study that involved Norvasc and the water pill. Secondly, if we're going to have a best choice, we have to look at all the options for which we have any plausible information about outcomes, about costs and benefits. We have to be comprehensive. Of course, you can't look at every conceivable option, but all the options which people can make a case for. And that means that you have to look at alternative medicine as well as mainstream medicine. Because mainstream medicine isn't always wrong. And alternative medicine involves a lot of bullshit. So you got to look at both, and when you look at both, what do you get? It's what we call in this group integrative medicine. So if you're going to do best choice medicine, as a corollary, and we all want best choice medicine, as a corollary, it's clear, it's obvious that integrative medicine is the best medicine. It's the only kind of medicine where you could begin to make a claim as to what's best. And then the last thing, and this is especially important for us, when we're trying to make this choice, we have to have information that we can rely on and have some hope that it's legitimate. And that means when someone tells us that B12 deficiency can lead to fatigue, like Jacklin did, we have to be able to get confirmation of that without being an expert, without going to medical school. And now, for the first time in the history of man, with the internet, we can do that. If someone told me 20 years ago that B12 deficiency led to fatigue, I would have to go to the library, check out some books that probably weighed 20 pounds, bring them home, figure out how to read them, and then I would know. Now all I do is go on Google and put in B12 plus fatigue and bang. And then I can go on Medline and I can read as many abstracts as I want. The whole world has changed because now, thanks to the internet, medical information is confirmation ready. And that's what is going to be our salvation. And that's what I want to talk about when I get to the question as to what we can do in this group to protect ourselves living in a world where medicine's corrupt. How are we doing? Okay. Okay, now begins my defense of the doctor. Excuse me?
The doctor doesn't know how to use the internet, he's too stupid. You're busy. So ignorance is not an excuse.
Okay, good. That's a very good argument. Everybody hear what the man said? He said, look, the doctor should know how to use the internet. If Jacklin can use the internet, the doctor should be able to know how to use the internet. The thing is, the doctor doesn't think he needs to use the internet because he already knows, see?
I actually have to take just a little bit of disagreement there.
Yeah.
A lot of doctors know how to use the internet. They go there and they see an amazing array of conflicting data, and they're not able to, in the time they have to continue their education, to sort out the BS from the accurate stuff, especially given the drug company studies that are actually lies.
Right.
So how do you know what good data is out there when you don't know? The standard reaction people have to information overload is you stop paying attention to all that crap and do what I've always done. It's human behavior.
Right.
Well, I think the bigger problem, though, is that if you're only relying on a very small subset of information to make your decisions with, you have an inherent problem. And that's the issue. That's
Bias.
like, it's a bias, you know, and in the case of my father and his darn doctor, you know, it's like, well, my peers don't think that, you know, so he isn't willing to try. And he has to have his arm twisted, and then he goes, oh my goodness, that works, but would he try it on anybody else? Never in a million years. And he wouldn't even look for any, and that's scary.
I'll tell you what, gang, I'll tell you what, this is the good part. That's why I'm rushing, because I want to get through so we can get into this. I really want to have this out. But, okay, well, just take one more question, Barry.
I think we ought to turn to Phil Miller and his approach. Phil, you said that I think sometimes 80% of the research you just don't believe, and the other 20% you use common sense with.
The problem that you have here, the seminal basis of this is what validates information and truth. And it's what I call the pipeline. And that's a good diagram there. The pipeline is what validates that I think this is true. Is it the internet? Is it my peers? Is it good-looking drug reps? What validates that? That's at the basis of it.
Right on. Okay. Okay, I'll tell you what, gang, listen, I'm going to cut this off. We'll come back to this in 5 minutes, okay? We'll come back to this in 5 minutes. Doesn't follow the established treatment guidelines, which they don't create. The doctor risks a loss of license and a liability lawsuit. No, the doctor is not at fault because our doctors are given inadequate information about the drugs and surgeries they recommend. They get this in medical school. They get this in their continuing education coursework, which is sponsored by the drug companies, which often puts them on a cruise to the Caribbean to take the continuing courses. And they get it from those good-looking sales reps that Phil Miller was talking about. And don't think that's not important. The drug company spends the drug industry spends $10,000 per doctor in this country, $12 billion, selling their products to the doctors.
How about the food they provide to the nurses and everybody in the office?
The food, yeah.
Every doctor's office has
Yeah.
food provided by the
See, now,
That's
so
important to good luck.
the way,
I'm telling you, that is a killer weapon that has been used forever.
the good-looking sales rep.
And you know what? Now the vitamin companies are doing the same thing. They're still coming at me now from all the vitamin companies. This technique is used everywhere.
Yeah, sure.
You know, can I say something?
You go ahead, Lana.
So that works until you come to a clinic that has 3 female doctors, no male doctors. Then look at the good-looking female sales reps. They get so confused.
Okay. I'm going to come back to this in this question, but I just like to put it this way. This is kind of facetious, but there's a kind of a truth to it. See, the trouble is that your doctor was captured in medical school by undercover agents for Big Pharma. Their doctors were captured in medical school by undercover agents for Big Pharma.
Why can't everybody be? They weren't undercover. Us, the doctors, the pharmacists, everybody.
Sorry, say again?
Why can't we all be? Us stupid people, stupid greedy doctors.
Well, okay. Well, I don't think I don't, because then we just throw up our hands and say, oh God, you know, original sin.
No, we don't do it in this room.
I know, but of course, in a way, you're right, because then we all have to take, get active, take responsibility. But I really want to say it's the system, because you see, the doctors are smart people, we're smart people. It can't be, it's not that we're at fault in some kind of, like we're lazy or stupid or something. It's the system is so designed that the incentives are there to get this corrupt result. Okay, hold on. Okay, so this is a quote from Phil Jacklin, facetiously, but the philosopher. Best choice medicine is what we get when we make rational and well-informed decisions using cost-benefit analysis. In economics and applied mathematics, cost-benefit analysis is called the Bayesian decision model. So there, I want to throw in a little technical expertise there. Okay, now what to do? Now, there are several things. There are 3 things that I'd like to just mention briefly, and then we'll go to the questions and we can have this out about whether the doctors are at fault and so forth. It seems to me that the whole problem is that the pharmaceutical companies control the flow of information about medicine. They do this in various ways. I guess this is the list right here. They control, probably the main thing is that they control so much funding for research, because You see, the medical school professors and the people who've done the most research are the ones that get together in little conferences and formulate medical guidelines. That is, they formulate the treatment plans that the rest of the medical profession is supposed to follow. And they're the top researchers, and they're the professors, and their job is to stay on top of all the newest stuff. So wouldn't you expect them to know more about what treatment plan is best than anybody else? So they formulate those treatment plans. But the thing is, they're top researchers because they got the most research money. I mean, there's lots of good, smart people out there who can do great research, including people in this room, believe me. Do research that's as good as can be done. There are world-class scientists in this room. You know, and everyone knows Steve Fox is one of them. But he doesn't get funding because the funding comes from the companies that have an interest in getting research done around their product. And so the funding for that the medical school makes the medical school professor's reputation typically comes from the pharmaceutical companies. And therefore, indirectly, the pharmaceutical companies are kind of gatekeepers for who gets promoted and who has a reputation and who ends up making the treatment guidelines. And so that's what I mean by indirect control of faculty promotions. In this way, there's the treatment of guidelines or treatment plans. There's continuing education, medical journals, sales reps, the good-looking sales reps, and now in recent years, direct advertising to the public. So it's amazing what billions of dollars can do when spent carefully and intelligently. If you think this can't happen, this couldn't be true, but think about it. If you spend billions of dollars and everybody else is sitting in a room like this. In fact, this group is practically unique in America, right? And here we are, 100 people, listening to this analysis, and it's a grain of sand on the shores of the ocean. And here is the ocean, which is the $16 billion which the drug companies spend, right? That's how it happens.
But you know, Phil,
Yeah.
It's a war of minds. That's what this
Who's
is.
talking? Tom.
This is a war of minds.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the dollar spent is to grab your mind, to grab your kid's mind. That's what the objective is, and they're succeeding. There are more drug ads now on TV than in time of history.
Right.
Okay, all the kids are inundated with all the commercials about cereals and all this kind of crap, and so they're going to win the battle because of the sheer numbers of people. They're going to win because they have the dollars, and that's what it's about in the bottom line. It's always about dollars.
Okay, but here's the thing. So, here's the thing. What we've got on our side is the fact that our lives are at stake.
That's us.
Yeah, but see, we know this message. I'm not telling you guys anything that's new. I'm just kind of put the pieces together that we all had already. And once you get those pieces, even before they're together, you're not going to change. And if anything, what I'm trying to do is kind of give you the strength of your convictions in this. Now, what I'm saying is that this message is going to get around if we can just try to do a little work, put a little intelligence into it, and there, a few bucks, because people's good medicine is a matter of life and death. And if we put that out to people and we're telling the truth, our message is going to get heard. There's no question about it. Yes, Alan.
Another whole influence in this, Phil, that I don't think you mentioned, are the insurance companies and the massive power and influence that they have
Right.
on the second-to-second practice of medicine.
Right.
And a lot of what doctors can and can't do and patients are willing to do or not do has to do with what's being reimbursed.
Right. That's a very important point. By the way, that's Dr. Alan Brower, my own personal physician. I thank you, Alan, for your many years of supporting us and your help for me. But
You're right on, Phil. I mean, I really respect and admire how you're putting all this together.
well, thank you, Alan. But it started. The first time Steve Fox said, "Go and see this guy." I can't tell you how many things that Steve Fox has told me that have changed my life. But anyway, that was one of them. Yes, sir.
I would like to show another aspect of all these things. I have a friend on the other coast, and he started to work for a pharmaceutical company. And they had initial instructions and so on, and then it was clear that they are doing something to remove symptoms.
And not treating causes.
Somebody asked why that, why they don't develop you're something to cure.
To cure it instead of deal with symptoms, right?
And the instructor said, that is not their business. They are in this other business.
Well, you know, I'd be surprised. I don't think very many people think that way, really. I mean, that's.
Someone from the company said that? Yeah.
I don't think.
That's being honest. It's a disease management industry, very blatantly. Every doctor in the system knows that. Every patient.
What's the phrase, Steve?
Disease management industry.
A disease management industry.
Cure disease and manage it. Because when it's cured, it's not there to be managed.
Well, I don't think they even know that it can be cured. They think it can't be cured. The best you can do is manage it.
Well, I think that you're right in a sense, and that in my, battles with the FDA, with the AIDS Underground and with the Down syndrome parents and all this nutritional stuff, I came to realize that most of the people in the FDA, this was mostly back in the 70s and into the 80s, were very well-meaning people.
Right.
They honestly believed that if they could stop me from enriching the sewer with my B vitamins, that they'd be doing me a favor. They really believed that. And so I have to say that...
Because they were telling you that you're wasting your time taking B vitamins, it just makes expensive urine, right?
Expensive urine, yeah. This is one of the things from the 50s that people came up with.
Right,
that
right.
Dumping these vitamins is a sign that they're not doing anything, and therefore there's no benefit to be obtained. So that's part of this religious ideology that you were mentioning in terms of the flow of information in church versus science. And
right.
I'm a firm believer that science is in fact a religion. But I would like you to look at another question, and that is in this issue of looking at information and either validating it or confirming it or whatever, however you want to describe it, that it comes down to for people in the system, it comes down to the perception of the validity of the information and not the actual validity of the information. And so you can't look at the information on the internet and judge it in a real sense. You can only judge it based on perception, and that perception is going to be colored by the credibility of the author. It'll be the language that's used, perceptions that you have, choices of fonts and colors, things that are just totally out there. And I've researched several scandals that have happened, and I've come across things in the literature where 99% of the people in the world who looked at a particular study, who took the conclusion of the authors at face value, even though the evidence that they presented was 180 degrees opposite to their conclusion. But they just put it out there, and because the people who said this and the people who published it, British Medical Journal, these people have credibility, that therefore anything that they say is going to be taken, as valid. And somebody who criticizes it, no matter what scientific basis they have, will not be taken seriously.
Well, there's a lot to that. I mean, look at the church. If you walk into a cathedral, you see those stained glass windows and this $1 billion structure, how can you doubt the authority of an institution like that?
That's what stained glass windows were.
Sure. I mean, here's my counter rebuttal on that. We're educated people, and we've gotten through all the nonsense, and we find our way, and other people can find their way. We just have to try to help them do it. And now there's three things I'd like to do, and then I will just go directly to the questions. Let me see what we have left here. I can't remember. Okay. That's just an acknowledgement of how difficult it is to use the internet. Okay, now there's three things. There's the proposal that I gave to the board, which I'd be glad to send to anybody who's interested, for a new and improved internet health information system. And that would cost some money. And if anybody knows of access to somebody who has funds for this kind of thing, a nonprofit organization such as we are, thanks to Dick Mata, let us know, because we'll go and meet with those people and we'll see if we can get some money. But then, short of having the money, there's a couple of other things we can do. For one thing, we can have a project here in this group and get some of you involved, because I know there's a lot of talent in this group that we're not, that we could, if you would only come forward and let me know you have a little time, we could make use of your talents and your time. What we could do is have a search service. And when someone has a project and a question, we could have people in this group who've had a little experience on doing a search service as a kind of web reference librarian. Nobody would try to tell anybody what to do, but they would help them generate information as to what their options were, what the outcomes of those options were. And then that person could make a choice. Yes, sir?
Fundamental to all this is math.
Is what?
Math.
Math?
M-A-T-H.
Yeah.
Like an equation.
Mm-hmm.
And the scientific method for evaluating data. Under evaluating data, you have areas like numerical analysis and test and measurement. So one of the challenges in the scientific method is in order to get more than one-time reproducible data, you really got to know your techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't set up a simple equation in bio areas such as E equals MC squared. Simple in the sense that it's a 3D.
So, okay, now give me the bottom line.
The bottom line is that there aren't simple equations or simple meters that you could plug into a person and say, your pH is this kind of pH, etc. So the challenge is just because 15 people did research, and back to the validity issue, how do you verify that the data is more than one time?
Okay, well what we have to do, okay, here's what we have to do. What we have to do is what we always do. We have to find out who the experts are that are honest. That's one of the things the reference librarian is going to do. They're going to have a list of the websites and the books who are honest and there's a kind of a consensus among honest people who with no axe to grind and aren't selling anything. That's a good website. That those are reliable experts. For example, one of the people would be Steve Fox's website, because Steve, we know to a fault, will not take money in exchange for giving his opinion in favor of something, right?
Yeah, but the point is,
So I got you.
I'm not going to say I'm right. But I would like to say, if somebody's putting some point of view out there, I would like to say what my point of view is, so that people consider it in the context of their decision. And so I look at it as there's no such thing as validity. It's all of these different opinions that come from different points of view, and there's no way I'm going to escape my bias any more than you can escape your bias, or a doctor can escape their bias. I mean, I would like to say that, if somebody comes to me and says I'm wrong about something, that I would have the honesty to listen to them and to hear what they say enough to play it off against all my knowledge, so that I can correct myself if I'm wrong. And that, in my opinion, is one of the major institutional failings of the medical profession, is that doctors don't have the patience for that, they don't have the allowance for that, they've got 15 minutes to see you if you're lucky, 7 minutes to see you if you don't, and therefore if you ask a question, you are a troublemaker. And it's their job to abuse you rather than educate you.
Well, Steve and I have had this argument. This is really a philosophical argument, and I just totally disagree with him about that there's no such thing as validity. I mean, after all, first of all, there are facts. If 100 people have a bypass surgery, then it's an absolute fact that so many of them died within the first year, and so many of them didn't. There is a reality, is what I'm saying. There is such a thing as a reality, folks. Okay, and we do have access to it. We can't figure out what it is usually. Not always. So there, Some of it. But so, and so what I'm saying is, wait a minute.
If I give you one example where you're wrong on that, would you change your?
Yeah, but do it afterwards, because I want to hear what Bob has to say.
No, I want to say that one of the things that we have to make sure that we don't fall into. See, in standard medicine, they do double-blind studies, and then they statistically analyze it, standard deviations and so forth, to find out whether it's statistically significant or not. The thing that I have found most valuable, after you get past the diseases like one-cause disease, like strep throat, give penicillin, but actually they're not really one cause. But anyway, it's biochemical individuality. And that is the problem, is that if you start analyzing integrated medicine in terms of what is best for it, it's not going to work. You've got to take a very careful history on the individual patient, because we're all different, and what one person gets best results on, another person won't. Now, anecdotal medicine has been given a bad name by orthodoxy. For to my mind, it is the best medicine. It means that it has worked in people, not animals. And so if it has worked in several people, and they tell me about it, and somebody else comes in with that problem, okay, I'll try it out. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't.
Okay, I tell you what. Now I'm gonna kind of shut up now and just kind of let you take comments and stuff, so you all can have something to say. Here, Mike.
There's one area that we could do something for the long term that will make the biggest difference, and that is the insurance industry. They can be convinced that they will save a fortune of money not paying these $50,000 operations by supporting our kind of medicine. That they could be our best allies, and it will take time in the future.
Right.
And that's the way to break it, because the drug industry isn't going to give up.
Actually, there's a big fallacy in that.
What's that?
The dollar volume that they process is how they make their profit. And insurance companies don't process so much money through their system, they make less profit.
No, there's a limit.
They're not interested in cutting down the amount of money that flows through them. The thing I think to do is to get to the companies, because companies, I don't know if many of you know this, but large companies are basically self-insuring their workforce, and they use an insurance company to process the
Okay,
paperwork.
someone making notes here. These are good ideas.
It saves a company money if they can find better treatment for their employees.
But you're not 100% right, because in South Africa, they have a plan right now. It's a plan where you stay healthy. Okay, it's put together by guys 38 years old. They have 1.9 million people on the plan, and it's a stay healthy plan. So what you're saying is not factually true, because they do have a plan in South Africa that says they want you to stay healthy, and that's how they're going to benefit from it.
As a private insurance company?
That's right, in South Africa.
There's another piece of the insurance question, and that's testing. So if you're looking at biochemical individuality, you're looking at lifestyle, an insurance company is interested in spending less money on someone ought to be able to say, what are the common risk factors, or even better, what are the real risk factors that aren't recognized, like all this cholesterol BS. So if you wanted to sign up with an alternative health company, you could go to the alternative health company and you could say, I'm willing to give you access to X medical tests, which I'll do annually, and if I'm treating myself well, my premium should be very low, and essentially I expect to be covered for disaster stuff, and I don't expect to be covered for the food I eat, because that's what I eat. That makes a lot of sense if you don't have the dollar flow.
So in other words, have a new kind of health insurance company.
One based on actual risk versus making money without paying much attention to.
Okay.
But today you can buy a major medical program, and you can take a high deductible, and so the only time you're going to be using that health plan is when you go to the hospital with something very serious. Other than that, you're going to out-pocket it.
You know such a plan?
Okay. Hey, wait a minute. Let's go in the hand system here. Now let's see.
The name of such a plan, I'd like to know.
Any of the health companies have these plans.
Okay.
Major medical.
Hey, listen, tell you what, Steve, I'll come back to you. I promise I will. But now, does anybody else want to jump in here?
I'd like to address your question, your slide here.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. I would like to say that given the lack of what we know about biochemistry and biochemical individuality and pharmacology and even issues like cluster size in water and how that affects physiology, the effect of all these pollutions and bad diet and all, how they play off against each other, that there's too much opinion to talk about this as in a knowledge context, and that you should look at it as a dialogue project, so that if somebody comes to your network, that what they get is all the different points of view that are out there, and some context to judge the believability of each of those people in the context of the values of their life. If you can do that for them, then they will be making as informed a decision as is possible to be made.
Okay, well, see, what I would think is that the stuff that we don't have information about, we just leave that out. We don't even put that in the list of options, because we don't know how those things work out. The cluster water and all that, like Jim is always talking about cluster water, it's always been too hard for me, to tell you the truth.
It's like EDTA, that stuff, it just doesn't
Well,
make any sense.
Exactly.
It's credibility.
See now.
Vitamin E, all these people, the Shoot brothers, said all this
No,
stuff
no.
about vitamin E back in the 70s. It was all proven bullshit.
Well, see, here's the thing. Now look, here's the proof of this is that Steve writes this brilliant newsletter for 10, 15 years, and everybody read it, and it was great science. And now he's saying, you can't count on science, you have to do dialogue and kind of, feel your way into it. And I'm saying... Okay, Diana. You're voting. Oh, she's voting. Okay, well, okay. Let's see. Anybody else hasn't been heard from? Okay, we heard from you just a minute. Well, anybody else? Okay, yes, sir.
Well, I think that there are some major blind spots, both in all three. In the mic is not on. Is it working now? Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
There are major blind spots in all three systems: in the medical system, in the insurance system, and in this group. And one of the things that I have not seen anywhere is biofeedback. And biofeedback, you can, if you Google respirate, R-E-S-P-E-R-A-T-E, this is a device which teaches you to slow your breathing. When you slow your breathing, a number of things happen, one of which happens to be that your blood pressure drops. Zero side effect if it works. Migraine headaches. Half of the people in the world can be taught to think away their migraine headaches by teaching them to make their hands warm. So a general relaxation response. These things are very well documented in the literature.
I believe
the
it.
medical profession doesn't want to hear a damn thing about them, and the insurance companies won't cover them.
Right.
So this is it may take 10 sessions at $100 a session, but then the person is cured and he doesn't have side effects and he doesn't have to use drugs again ever. So I don't think that your very rational argument really holds water in our very peculiar.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing. Isn't it the case that what you said can be demonstrated? So that's all I'm saying. It can be demonstrated, and here's the other interesting thing about this. The nice thing about alternative medicine is it's pretty inexpensive usually. It's very inexpensive to learn how to control your breathing.
No.
Well, relatively.
$300 for a device.
There you go. I have a much more expensive device, but we're talking a few $100s. That is not cheap by most people in the world, even in the U.S. I spent $100 grand on alternative devices and stuff, and I was lucky I had the money. If I didn't, I'd probably be under a gutter somewhere right now. Seriously.
Well, how much do your prescription expenses cost compared to $300 one-time expense?
You see, one of the things we could do is we could set up a database where we all agreed to put our medical records and what we're doing into some kind of database, and we could start to generate I don't know if it would be called an epidemiological study or what kind of a study, but we could begin to generate some data to show that things like this work. And it's just a shame, when you think of all the medical data that's wasted. I mean, if they had good data, if they had a good system for keeping people's medical records and where their privacy was protected, we'd know right away that Tambacor was killing people. We'd know right away every killer drug that was a killer drug would be immediately identified. I mean, it's amazing. Let me go up and get this list.
I just want to make a comment
Yeah.
that the Silicon Valley State of the Valley address was, the speaker on medicine was Levy, I can't think of his first name, who is very young. David Levy? And he is working with joint venture partners, and they have a whole health information highway development program they're working on right now. So there is a conduit that's being started that will link up medical records and all your files and all your x-rays and the communication between doctors and insurance companies and you. That's in the works, happening right now. So eventually, there should be a way to tap into that for exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, okay, good. Well, it's way overdue, and I'm glad to hear about it. And maybe if you could help us line up a speaker, we could have somebody in that. Okay, I want to get this lady up here.
I'm a biofeedback therapist, and the physicians I work with are really wanting for those patients more and more who are saying themselves, I don't want to take the medication. We do have a clinic here in Palo Alto called Integrated Healing House where you can actually do studies if anybody's interested, because we're seeing a lot of patients using biofeedback from the physicians who are actually sending them for blood pressure and headaches. So that there is a change, a really big change going on, but I think it needs to be documented more in the clinics that are actually doing it.
Right.
I've been doing it for 15 years now. In the last 5 years, the doctors are actually calling me and saying that the patients are refusing the drugs, that they want the biofeedback because they've heard about it. So it needs to get out more.
Right. And there are a few pioneers. I know, Alan, you were a pioneer in that. Alan Brower. Right. And also for pain management, wasn't it, partly? So, okay. Yes, sir, Bob.
Well, let me tell you, you cannot solve problems without understand the fundamentals. And if you pay more attention what I told you years ago, today you would be far ahead. And if you keep going the way you do, you just get yourself, you just don't get anywhere.
Okay, but you're talking about theoretical physics now, right?
No, I'm talking about science. You cannot. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
Before Copernicus.
Put the mic up to your mouth.
Before Copernicus, everything revolved around the Earth. And if you wanted to shoot a satellite with that the theory, you wouldn't have a prayer. And you are in science in pre-Copernican age. We go to nanotechnology and people do things, do that. They measure things, but they don't know why it is. And if you follow what my discovery at the time I gave you, you would have had solution.
Okay. 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 Well, in my own defense, let me just tell you that Bob has a brilliant and possibly right alternative theory of atomic structure and chemical bonding and everything. And that's what he's talking about. And he said if I paid more attention to that, which I have paid considerable attention to it, and I finally had decided that I couldn't make a judgment on it. But he's telling me that if I had just stayed a little longer, how many hours did I spend on that, Bob? I mean, it's amazing. But anyway, I just say that in my own defense, so you know what Bob is referring to here. Yeah. Okay. Yes, sir.
Can anyone here speak to the issue of how far away are we at RNA analysis, where you can see defective RNA and with an individual go in and repair it?
Well, Gary Gordon is working on that right now, and I think you'd have to see his lectures on that. They're coming along with that. So ask him about that. I wanted to say one thing. There's a comment here, is that the Shute brothers years ago said something about vitamin E, and that's now considered to be bullshit. Well, I want to tell you, the orthodoxy lies about nutrients, and they get studies, that so-called scientific studies, and it's very hard for me to believe that this vast amount of clinical anecdotal evidence over the years on vitamin E, and like leg cramps or preventing blood clots and so forth like that, it's all a bunch of nonsense. I mean, and there's another factor, is that if you take, say, 10,000 people and analyze whether or not they are taking vitamin E or not, and whether or not they've had a heart attack, the problem is that if a person has had a heart attack, they're practically crazy not to take vitamin E these days. Everybody knows that. So that if you go in the population and find out who's taking vitamin E, a lot of them have had previous heart attacks. So of course they're going to have more heart attacks than the person who is not taking vitamin E, who never had a heart attack. And so statistically, you can bias your subjects to the point that you can really come up with it.
David, I think you cut it off. Let me just say one more thing. Yeah.
You wanted me to tell them about Stanford Medical School?
Yeah, it's almost 10, so we have to stop. I'll tell you what, I'd like to have Dave make a little quick report about Stanford Medical School. Then I'd like to say one more thing, and then we'll wind it up. I promise you won't go more than 2 minutes. Here we go, Dave.
I happened to encounter a Stanford med student recently, and we got talking about some of these issues, and she said that they have banned drug samples from the entire Stanford Medical Center in the last few years, which is kind of cool. They also, if you go to the Stanford website, Stanford Medical School website, you'll see they have a quite detailed policy page about conflict of interest that all their faculty and people who work at the med center are supposed to abide by. And she said also that there was in one of their newsletters, which I have not found on the web, that came out recently, they are specifically prohibited from. Well, what happens is, she said that a drug company has some research done. And then they go and shop this around to prominent professors and try to get them to sign their name on as a co-author of this research that they had nothing to do with. And they're now specifically prohibited against doing that. So and that's Stanford, the absence of evil,
Right.
So some good things are happening.
Thanks very much, Dave. Also, at the West Valley Hospital on Bascom and Moore Park, they've also banned sales reps. They don't let the sales reps in the hospital anymore. This is all happening. I mean, it's finally, the word is getting out. The pharma scandal is so huge that finally the word is getting out, at least to the people who read. But you know, anyway, I just want to say one more thing. I want to invite you to come forward and give me a call, email me, if you have time, especially if you're semi-retired, retired, or whatever, and you think you can help. Email me, because there's a lot of work that we can do, and I think we can set up a search service that is helpful to people. See, the thing about this group, this is why we're together. We study together, right? We can help each other. I want to make that more systematic, and I want to be more aggressive about that. And there's talent. There's talent out there, and we need project leaders. We'll put you on our letterhead. We can't make the board any bigger because we've already got the board is pretty huge, but we're going to do that. So please now. You heard this problem. You know we're not going to give up on it. So I would like you to come forward. I don't know who you are. I'd like you to come forward and say, I can do a little bit here, and we can figure out. We'll start having some meetings. We'll have some fun too. So the thing about the Smart Life Forum is what you do is at the Smart Life Forum. This sounds crazy. I know. I hesitated, thought about saying that, and decided not to, but I think I'll say it. What you do at the Smart Life Forum is you try to have fun and save lives, and it's a kind of a crazy combination. Yeah, Ira.
All the other attacks on various problems, you ought to have the same technology applied to prevention.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first
Sure.
thing.
Yeah. Okay. I'll tell you what, Ira. Let's continue this discussion afterwards. Okay. Okay.
Second is that the timing is critical.
Yeah.
Namely, if some of these things pay off immediately,
Yeah.
that's one thing. If they pay off in 5 years, that's another thing, and that has to be put into the calculation.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right.
On that note, I think we should all give a round of applause for our Thanks for all the time and energy you put into doing the research and the presentation. And, it's very much
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Yeah.
Now I'd like to ask everyone, normally we kind of talk and whatnot. We do have a nice overhang where it's not wet outside, so we should make our way out if we're going to leave. If we're going to stick around for the next presentation, then we should stick around, but we can't mill around during the presentation. It won't work. So if you're going to stick around, stay seated. If you're going to take off, take off. That's pretty much the message.
Yeah.
The next presentation will start in a minute, maybe a minute and a half, and we'll be talking about treatment.
Patients were obese. And really, as I look around this room, I don't really see anybody who's as obese as the patients that he was talking about. But anyway, how many of you here feel that sugar is critical to your health, that you must not eat sugar, and that even then a high carbohydrate diet contributes to sugar in your body, uses high carbohydrate like sugar and causes you trouble? How many of you felt that? Well, I rest my case. He said a few things, like one of the things he said, he had 2 cats, 4 parakeets, and 1 dog, and he knew what to feed cats and what to feed parakeets and what to feed dogs and what to feed humans. I think Roger Williams would have turned over in his grave at that. The biochemical individuality is such that we humans really seem to vary in our diets. I mean, I know there are a lot of people here, and I try and get a lot of people on a vegetarian macrobiotic type diet. But there are some of you out there that are omnivores or even carnivores, and you wish you were dead if you don't eat meat, and you just got to eat meat. How many here feel that you have got to eat meat? Yeah, that's interesting. How many? So anyway, there were other people. The internet was just crazy as far as comments of our leaders after that talk. And I think other people would have some comments here too. But I just want to make that clear, that I think that most of you would not do very well on a high carbohydrate diet.
Cats and dogs are not grain eaters to begin with.
Neither are people, right?
That's my understanding. That's an illusion, because historically, man was a hunter-gatherer. That's how he began all this stuff. You didn't have agriculture crops to begin with. And so the only thing that allowed the population to grow was agriculture. But before that, it was hunter-gatherer, eat animals, and whatever was in season, that was the way it was. So everything else has been contrived.
Well, like the Greenland Eskimos have no fruits, vegetables, or grains. They eat 100% meat. And they have very little, if no, heart attack problems.
Thanks for your comments. I also wanted to bring up about that talk. It sounded to me like many of his patients were probably very allergic to a food. When you're allergic to a food, you tend to get obese. I know, I used to weigh 300 pounds. I was allergic to wheat and dairy. And I'm not allergic to them anymore, except maybe dairy. I just don't eat them because they're not good for me, except when I want a chocolate chip cookie, and then it's just okay. So, moderation and everything. But the point there is that if you go on a 10-day radical high carbohydrate fast that contains almost nothing that you normally eat, you might avoid some serious allergens. You will feel better, you will detoxify, and you will lose weight rapidly. I lost 50 pounds in 3 months without trying when I first did this. So there's more to it than just eat a lot of starch, especially when there's no mechanism that I've found yet for that to work.
Yes, but anytime you skip any anytime you skip any food group, you'll lose weight. If you skip fats, if you skip carbohydrates, if you skip proteins, you'll just upset the balance and you'll lose weight. That will happen.
It's an interesting comment. I know that if I skip fat and protein and eat only carbs, I bloat. I gain 5 pounds a week of fat. So it seems to me like there's something to do with the mix of the ratios, and there's a caloric thing.
I've never really done that. I bet you've actually had fats involved in your carbs.
You can't find carbos naturally without fat. But I've eaten extremely low-fat diets in an attempt to lose weight. So it's interesting that the biochemical individuality point that Bob made, I think, comes up as true. But overall, if you cut out stuff, you're unbalanced. You're either going to lose weight, or if you're doing something wrong, you might even gain. I don't know, but I appreciate the thought. Other thoughts about this?
Comment about the diets for cats, at least. Many breeders are now going to kibble diets which have no grains at all because they feel that this gives healthier cats. Then the question, we have a hot tub. We don't want to use chemicals, particularly bromine, because it tends to replace iodine, things like that. We do have an ozonator. Does anyone have anything to offer about how to keep the water pure and clean?
GFC, grapefruit
Yep.
seed extract?
Wonderful suggestion. That was for grapefruit seed extract.
What quantities? I don't know. You'd have to look it up. Grapefruit seed extract is available at health food stores in usually 2 or 4 ounce liquid bottles. And the people that supply that stuff also sell it for swimming pools and hot tubs and so on. And you'd have to contact the manufacturer. There's one up in Lakeport that's particularly well known. And I can't think of the product name, but Whole Foods and all the other health food type stores sell that company's product.
That would be Nutribiotic.
I've got a good idea. First, a friend of mine had lots of money. We used to take 5 and 10 pound sacks of salt pellets, throw them in his tub, then run it through a pump where it would electrolyze the salt, separate the chloride out from the sodium, and I thought that was state of the art. Until a company came out with one which is an electrolyzer. It's a tank where water passes by a carbon rod, rather a copper rod, and a platinum coated rod. So this doesn't separate the water into acid and nothing, but it electrolyzes it. Absolutely pure, no chemicals, no extra costs, nothing going into your body. And the process is much like ozonation in that it flocculates the particles down to the bottom of your pool or your hot tub, and you can just sweep it right up. So you can talk to me later about that if you wish. And the company on the web is called EcoSmart, but I know someone here in California that can represent that.
That's the best one.
Another comment back here.
I was a guinea pig for a herbalist that was asking for volunteers to come and have a foot soak. So I put my feet in a pot of warm water with some kind of a copper solenoid or something in it that has a little pump, and then it's hooked up to an electrode thing. And then I watched this water turn into the most putrid looking gunk I've ever seen. Don't want to describe it. I was there for 15 minutes, and I would sure like to know if anybody could tell me what was going on.
I've done the same treatment. I've got size 17 feet, and oh, it was really bad. But there's two companies who make those devices. I was someone here an expert on them. I got a couple.
Say something about the copper. I have a friend who has the copper thing in his pool, and I have a friend who has a pool with a copper setup, and it's a Lindell Cedar home, and when they purchased the home, they were finished looking at it when they discovered there was a pool in the basement. They smelled nothing. And the only thing that the owner, it makes it like a freshwater lake. And there's some residual bacteria, but it's very small, and you can do other things for that if you feel you must. The only thing he doesn't like about it is it makes a little stain on the side of the pool where the reaction takes place.
Well, you have to, it's the amount of voltage and amperage that goes into the copper. So the copper acts as a mild algicide, and then the platinum, which doesn't wear off, sends out electrons. So what happens is the oxygen in the water is literally ionized. So it's a combination of the two, and it's actually pristine. There's no stains or anything. So it's how these things are made.
There's also a salinization thing, and there's a silver thing out. You can find them on the web.
I'd also suggest the all-natural pool, which I've seen in a few magazines. This is where you plant some lilies. In all seriousness, you can have a pool that's healthy to swim in, much like many of us might have in old farm ponds. It's entirely possible to do that and get one that's not covered with scum, that doesn't have all sorts of bad smells and things like that. So that's sort of an up-and-coming, sort of environmentally friendly home sort of thing. But I think you have to be rich to do that. I'm not sure. It seemed like a lot of work when I read about it last.
On that flip system you were talking about, where you put your feet in the water with the electrodes and all of the gunk and everything comes up, I recommend you also try it without your foot in it.
Yes.
You'll find it looks about the same.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it isn't working and doing something for you, but you'll be interested. It's interesting to observe it.
Contribution to science.
I have to put my feet in one.
I would call that a controversial type of treatment. If it does something, my guess is it's not actually turning the water brown with toxins from you, but it could easily be doing something electrically to your body, which is the more likely guess, something along the lines of Rye frequencies. But I've not seen a great paper explaining what those things do, but I have seen lots of healers who spend $1,500 to buy one and use them on their patients who seem to like them. So maybe we should jump to another topic, unless another topic.
Yeah, I was going to mention on the iodine. I was thrilled when I heard that lecture, and then I think Steve or somebody was saying how you can put a little swath of tincture of iodine on your skin.
Oh. So I had not even tried to put tincture of iodine on my skin to see if, in fact, I might be iodine deficient. But one of my customers back east, I told him, he called me back 2 days later and he said, I got to tell you, he said, I'm 59 years old. He said, I work about 2 hours every day, and after dinner, he said, I'm beat. He said, after 2 days, he says, I don't believe it. He said, I've got more energy than I know what to do with. Most of his life, he was low energy in the evening. So I told this story to my neighbor. And I said, well, one sign oftentimes of low iodine is that your hair starts falling out. Whoops. And then you may have cold hands and feet. And the light bulb went off in his hand. He said, wow, that could be it. And I said, well, go try it. So we put some on his hand, and he called me back 2 days later, and he said, Jim, he said, for 20 years I've had ice cold hands and feet. He said, my hands are sweating right now. I said, well, maybe you ought to cut back a little bit on the iodine. But it's something worth trying. I guess it can't really hurt you. And they say how long it takes, for those that weren't here at the lecture by Dr. Brownstein, how long it takes for the iodine stain to disappear is indicative of how much iodine you may need. And then, of course, after that time, you want to do what they call the iodine loading test. And for those that didn't see Dr. Brownstein, I have videos that I shot down there. You can look at that and also go to his website, drbrownstein.com, and find the best way to do this iodine loading test. And it's a real eye-opener for a lot of people who start growing their hair back, and resume normal metabolism. So there you go.
Thanks. By the way, just to tie that back in with the swimming pool treatment, I have heard of iodine-treated swimming pools having positive health effects and being clean as well. So that's another possibility.
I have two probably elementary questions about vitamin C. First is it good for bacterial infections as well as viral? And the second is, are any forms of it more or less preferable than others, like ascorbic acid, ascorbyl, mineral ascorbates, and whatever else there might be?
That is a wonderful question that has been, I think, asked a few times and debated ad nauseum. So let's get some opinions on that one. Great question. I think we might have an expert in the room.
Well, let me first say that all of my research really has been with ascorbic acid. And it's cheap, and if you can tolerate it, one of my principles is if it's not broken, don't fix it. And I think that ascorbic acid cleans up the bowel too. There's something that happens, and I think a lot of chronic diseases have to do with dysregulations of bowel flora, and I think that the ascorbic acid helps that. Well, and yes, it does help with bacterial infections, but it actually, if you put it in solution, it kills bacteria directly in solution. I'm not so sure that we can take it into the body enough so that there is a direct killing. But my thought about how these things work is that all of these infections damage cells of the body producing free radicals. And these free radicals then sort of poison back the immune system. And when you neutralize the free radicals with massive doses of ascorbate, and remember why I'm saying that massive doses of ascorbate are better than just other free radical scavengers, is because I think that the amount of electrons, remember a free radical is a molecule that's lost an electron, and I think that the number of electrons that are carried in mostly on the vitamin C, vitamin E, beta carotene, selenium, and so forth that you eat are just enough to last a few minutes. That basically where the electrons come from when we're well is the mitochondria breaking down glucose and refueling things like the vitamin C. But massive doses of vitamin C, for the first time, we're able to throw away the vitamin C for the electrons carried. So we actually force a reducing redox potential onto the tissues involved by the disease. In other words, we're forcing electrons into the inflammatory areas, and free radicals mediate all inflammation. So that when you do this, the white cells come out fighting mad and pretty well make much shorter work of any bacterial infections.
The straight ascorbic acid has a low pH factor. Is that a factor?
Well, I understand that ascorbic acid has a pH of 3.5. Hydrochloric acid has a pH of 1. Now, this is a logarithmic scale, so that ascorbic acid is at least 1,000 times less acid than hydrochloric acid. So that's why I say anybody who takes ascorbic acid and they feel pain in the stomach, that is an acid burn, have got something the matter. They probably have Helicobacter or Candida, and that needs to be addressed. And then once the stomach returns to normal, then they shouldn't have any trouble with acidity. And I have never had a patient taking huge amounts of ascorbic acid, and like for instance, they may be taking 200 grams a day for a couple of days with like mononucleosis or viral pneumonias, and I've never seen a case of metabolic acidosis. It just doesn't seem to happen. So, and sodium, we use sodium ascorbate intravenously only because the acid would burn the veins, and so we have to buffer it. But understand that the reason probably why sodium ascorbate is more powerful by veins is that 100% gets into the veins, whereas the ascorbic acid that we take by mouth, a lot of it is destroyed in the gut, so it never gets into the veins. So we think that's why sodium ascorbate is more powerful by vein, but it's my experience it is not as powerful by mouth as ascorbic acid.
Any thoughts on the other ascorbates? You can take magnesium, zinc, copper, ascorbate, things like that in terms of mineral absorption. Thoughts there?
Well, they're good sources of the minerals, certainly. They're good sources of the minerals, certainly.
Okay. Another comment back here.
Just a question. As Dr.
start seeing a new liposomal form of vitamin C?
Yes, and I'm actually trying some experiments with that, but by and large, right now, I see no difficulties in most people with ascorbic acid. If you have trouble with your stomach, I want to encourage you to look into Candida, look into Helicobacter, and so forth. And then you will convert over to be able to taking ascorbic acid. The ascorbic acid is so cheap compared to these liposomal things. So I'm yet to be convinced, but I'm looking at it.
We've also had a long debate with our members about the liposomal, the contents of liposomes themselves, as to whether they're healthy or not. So I think we're probably going to get a comment about that now.
I've done a little bit of research recently with some liposomal forms, but I wanted to address the vitamin C question in terms of the mineral ascorbates. I do react badly to pure ascorbic acid in large doses. I caution everybody that you have to be careful about getting the vitamin C crystals in your teeth. It will damage your teeth. But if it's dissolved and you rinse your mouth afterwards, that's easily manageable risk. But what I do is I just add a small amount of milk of magnesia to my vitamin C, and it takes about 2 minutes for it to react, and I get some magnesium ascorbate, which raises the pH slightly. So instead of it being, like vinegar, it's more like orange juice in terms of its tartness, and I tolerate much better. Plus, I get a little bit of magnesium, which I need anyway. So that's one way that you can rely upon the cheapest form of vitamin C and not have to necessarily handle the acidity.
Any other comments about vitamin C?
I got a question for Dr. Cathcart. What's your position on Pauling's vitamin C and lysine usage for breaking down plaque and calcium in your arterial walls?
Well, I do take lysine for that reason.
Yeah, so do I.
I can't prove it yet by my own experience. Where I can really prove that lysine helps is anybody who has any herpes. Huge doses of lysine seem to be almost a specific antibiotic for herpes.
What's a huge dose?
Well, like they come in 500 milligram tablets, and I'll have people take 3 or 4 of them 3 or 4 times a day. I mean, there seems to be no toxic dose. And when you start feeling a little bit of itching when it comes on, if you take the lysine and if the itching doesn't stop right away, double your dose. I see no harm in it. And then when the attack is over, you can reduce it way down to maybe 1-3 times a day or something or other like that. But the theory was that it works by blocking the replication of the DNA of the virus because it blocks arginine. Now, if it really blocked arginine and the replication of DNA, you would think that people would age more rapidly, and I've seen no indication of that whatsoever. We have people taking large doses of lysine who have herpes, and they feel great. But then, now, because of heart, there's this fellow that's head of cardiovascular at Stanford, who is advocating high doses of arginine to make nitric oxide and to dilate the blood vessels and so forth. And I have found that even people who have chronic herpes, if they start the lysine first and slowly mix in the arginine, that they'll do fine, even taking large doses of arginine. Another thing about huge doses of vitamin C, some people with chronic herpes will have an outbreak of herpes if they take a low or moderate dose of vitamin C. And that's because, remember, when you're having an attack, your immune system is trying to kill the infected cells. So actually, when you augment the immune system, then you have an attack. Well, we have found that the huge doses taken right away will prevent this, plus the fact if a person gives a history of chronic herpes, I make them start the lysine right away with the massive doses of vitamin C. But some people have found that tiny doses of vitamin C will provoke herpes, and that along with the damage to the enamel, and the only bad effects that I've ever really seen from vitamin C in ascorbic acid form.
Thanks. It's always a pleasure to hear such complete answers. It's the reason I keep coming back. I had something I wanted to bring up, and I think Ira also had something. I read an interesting article from the Vitamin D Research Institute, a nonprofit that supports research in vitamin D. They were talking about levels of fluorine and thyroid toxicity with basically fluoride. So I'm already one of those people who wouldn't put fluoride in my body because it's actually a prescription thing for people who have overactive thyroids, and mine is not overactive. That's a big topic of debate. If you're one of the people who believes fluoride might not be good for you, this article, which is on their website, you'd have to Google for Vitamin D Research Institute, it talked about levels of fluoride in common drinks like black tea, green tea, etc. I drink, I don't know, 5 or 6 cups of green tea because it's, well, A, I like it, B, it's supposed to be good for you. But I found out I was getting a clinically noticeable amount of fluoride from doing that, just naturally occurring fluoride. So the thought, at least, that I've been doing for the last month or so is putting a drop of Lugol's iodine in a pot of tea as a way to counteract the fluoride. I'd rather not drink the fluoride, but I also like the tea. I'd love to hear thoughts from anyone about the idea of offsetting fluoride with iodine or just general fluoride content of foods and their thyroid toxicity. Any thoughts, anyone?
Well, I can only repeat what I heard Dave Brownstein talk about. I know he writes about it in his book. Maybe he didn't comment on it, but significant amounts of iodine to the point of sufficiency will displace both chlorine and fluoride as halides in the system.
Bromine and
chlorine. Oh, excuse me, bromine and chlorine. And chlorine, yeah. And so there's some value to loading on iodine until you reach sufficiency.
They also say that if you take a bunch of either ammonium chloride or sodium chloride, it helps you to purge bromine. I don't know about purging fluorine. And you don't necessarily have to take it with the tea, just make sure you're getting enough iron.
Interesting, okay. Another thought?
I had one comment that I thought that I would like to share about the liposomal delivery system. I've been experimenting with melatonin for a long time, and my dose, my ideal dose, I don't take it all the time, but take it fairly frequently, is somewhere between 2 and 3 milligrams. Well, when I started using liposomal melatonin, I started with half a milligram my first day and woke up with a melatonin hangover the next morning. And so my dose is actually about 0.2 of a milligram when taken in liposomal form, which is approximately 10 times efficiency for me. And furthermore, I've always had a minimal hypnotic effect from melatonin. And I get reliable hypnotic effect from the liposomal melatonin every time.
What is liposomal?
And where is it available from?
That's readysorb.com.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, READISORB.com.
What is liposomal?
Liposomal is a lipid shell technology.
Microlipid shell.
Yeah, very small spheres that are hollow inside, and you can put something inside to deliver it. It's kind of a delivery vehicle. You can think about it as a drug or a nutrient delivery vehicle. Steve,
And they can make a very, very small particle size.
Yeah.
What about the new technology, the PEGY somo?
I don't know.
Life Enhancement has got all their products now into that.
You want to talk about it?
Life Enhancement has gone into this, but they have a new process, and it puts a fuzzy layer around it. And I'm not sure that they were referencing that or not, because I believe it may be 6 times more effective as far as absorption into the body by putting it along under the tongue.
Is this PEG?
PEGYSOMAL, I believe. And they have CoQ10, folic acid, vitamin B12, those combinations and others. And they're rapidly going into it. They start with only 1, I think, or 2, and now they've got about 6 or 7 different items that you can buy on that basis.
6 times compared to liposomal or compared to?
That's what I'm not sure of. I think they were saying 6 times more than, but that's pretty heavy.
And liposomal. That's not usable.
Yeah, but I mean, it sounds pretty heavy to me, so I may be incorrect on that.
Life Enhancement is a relatively forward-thinking nutrient supplier, relatively well known.
We've forgotten about the main problem with liposomal being 70% of the liposomal vitamin C having that, and that too much of that omega-6 is no good, causing the poly-something-2 problem in the body. So what's the story on the effectiveness of that vitamin C? Because of the large amount of omega-6, which is not good for you.
Is there anyone here who really has an answer to that? I know we've had a lot of debates back and forth. We all kind of recognize that there's too much omega-6 in the common American diet. So I have not seen research, and I don't know if we have someone here who has, that says, you know, the bad parts of the omega-6 are offset by the CoQ10, melatonin, glutathione, or whatever else it is that's inside this liposomal stuff. Does anyone have a good answer to that? If not,